Chapter 2, Early Days, Believers and Skeptics, 2010-2012. The first block had been mined, the first transaction had been sent. Yet in those fragile early years, Bitcoin was still little more than an experiment shared among curious minds. Its value was unknown, its potential doubted, and its future far from guaranteed. This chapter tells the story of how a fringe idea began to take its first uncertain steps into the world, attracting true believers, harsh critics, and eventually the attention of regulators and criminals alike. A network of pioneers. By 2010, Satoshi Nakamoto was no longer alone. A small but growing community of enthusiasts had gathered around the project, each drawn by different motivations. Some were cryptographers intrigued by its elegance. Some were libertarians excited by its defiance of centralized control. Others were hobbyists who simply loved tinkering with new technology. Among them was Hal Finney, already a legend for his role in encryption. There was Gavin Andresen, a developer who would soon become one of Bitcoin's lead maintainers. And there were anonymous miners scattered across basements and bedrooms, running their CPUs to help secure a network that had, at the time, almost no economic value. Mining was absurdly easy compared to later years. With a standard desktop computer, anyone could generate new coins. Each block produced 50 BTC, a reward so plentiful that early miners often joked they had more coins than they knew what to do with. But the real question was, what was a Bitcoin actually worth? The first marketplace for value. In early 2010, enthusiasts began discussing how to assign value to this digital money. On online forums, people speculated, was one Bitcoin worth a cent, a fraction of a cent, or nothing at all? Then came a bold experiment. On May 22, 2010, a programmer named Laszlo Hanyecz offered 10,000 BTC in exchange for 2 pizzas. It took a few days, but eventually another community member ordered the pizzas for him and accepted the coins. It was the first documented purchase of a physical good with Bitcoin. At the time, 10,000 BTC was worth about $41, the cost of 2 large pizzas delivered in Florida. In later years, as Bitcoin's price soared, this transaction would become legendary. Bitcoin Pizza Day is still celebrated every year, a reminder of how far the currency has come and how much value it has accrued. For the first time, Bitcoin had crossed the boundary between theory and reality. It was not just math on a screen anymore, it could buy you dinner. The birth of exchanges. As 2010 progressed, informal trades of Bitcoin for dollars or euros began taking place. But something was missing, a proper marketplace. That changed with the launch of early Bitcoin exchanges. One of the first was Bitcoin Market, COM, which opened in March 2010. Suddenly, Bitcoin had a quoted price, 0.003 per BTC. Though volumes were tiny, this was a turning point. Bitcoin now had a market. Buyers and sellers could meet, and the invisible hand of supply and demand began to shape its value. By the end of 2010, Bitcoin's price had risen above 0.30, still almost worthless, but a 100-fold increase from its first listing. Those who mined or bought early were sitting on stacks of digital tokens that suddenly seemed a little less like play money, media attention and curiosity. As 2011 began, the wider world started to notice. Tech blogs wrote curious articles about this strange cryptocurrency. Mainstream outlets covered it sporadically, usually with skepticism. Bitcoin was portrayed as a niche experiment, or worse, a tool for criminals. Yet curiosity was spreading. A few entrepreneurs saw opportunity. Some investors sensed disruption. The community grew. The dark side, Silk Road. If Bitcoin's first use case was pizza, its second, far more notorious, was the Silk Road, an online black market launched in 2011. Using the anonymity of the Tor network and the pseudonym Dread Pirate Roberts, the site's founder created a marketplace where everything from cannabis to counterfeit IDs could be bought and sold. Payment? Only in Bitcoin. Silk Road thrust Bitcoin into headlines, but not in the way early believers hoped. To governments and regulators, it was now associated with drugs, crime, and shadowy transactions. To libertarians, it was proof that Bitcoin could enable free exchange beyond the reach of authorities. This duality, freedom versus illegality, would become a defining tension in Bitcoin's story. The exit of Satoshi. As the community grew, Satoshi Nakamoto began to step back. In December 2010, he made his last known public forum post. In April 2011, he emailed Gavin Andresen to say he was moving on to other things. And then he vanished. No one knows why. Perhaps Satoshi feared legal consequences. Perhaps he wanted the project to grow without being tied to one leader. Perhaps Satoshi was always a group, and the experiment had run its course. Whatever the reason, the creator of Bitcoin disappeared, leaving behind a network that was no longer dependent on him. Bitcoin was now in the hands of its community, volatility and skepticism. With exchanges operating, Bitcoin's price began to move wildly. In early 2011, it crossed $1 for the first time. By mid-year, fueled by hype and speculation, it soared to nearly $30. For those who mined thousands of coins on their laptops, the sudden wealth felt surreal. For skeptics, it was a bubble waiting to burst. They were partly right. By the end of 2011, the price had crashed back down below $3. Critics declared Bitcoin dead. Enthusiasts insisted it was just the beginning. The volatility scared many away, but for the faithful, it was exhilarating. They weren't just holding coins. They were participating in what felt like the early stages of a revolution. Regulators take notice. By 2012, governments had begun to pay closer attention. Bitcoin's association with Silk Road alarmed authorities. Financial watchdogs worried about money laundering. Central bankers dismissed it as irrelevant, but behind the scenes, reports and studies were being drafted. Some countries tolerated it. Others banned it outright. Most ignored it, unsure of how to classify this new phenomenon. Yet the very fact that regulators were asking questions showed how far Bitcoin had come. What had begun as an obscure cryptographic experiment was now forcing the world to pay attention. The first halving. In November 2012, Bitcoin experienced its first halving. The block reward for miners dropped from 50 BTC to 25 BTC, as programmed into the protocol. This event was more than a technical milestone. It was proof that Bitcoin's monetary policy worked exactly as intended. Unlike central banks that could print money at will, Bitcoin's supply schedule was fixed, predictable, and unchangeable. The halving reinforced the belief among early adopters that Bitcoin was not just digital money. It was sound money, immune to inflation. A community of believers. By the end of 2012, Bitcoin was still tiny in global terms. Its price hovered around $13, its user base was small, yet its community was fiercely passionate. Developers built wallets and exchanges. Activists promoted its potential for financial freedom. Libertarians hailed it as a weapon against state control. Economists debated whether it was genius or folly. Bitcoin was no longer a whisper, it was a voice. Sometimes mocked, sometimes feared, but increasingly impossible to ignore. The world beyond Bitcoin. Meanwhile, new projects were beginning to emerge. Inspired by Bitcoin's design, developers created altcoins, alternative cryptocurrencies that tweaked the rules or experimented with new features. Litecoin, launched in 2011 by Charlie Lee, promised faster transactions. Namecoin explored decentralized domain names. Dozens more followed. Though most would fade into obscurity, their very existence showed that Bitcoin had opened a door that could never be closed. The era of cryptocurrency had begun. Conclusion. From obscurity to debate between 2010 and 2012, Bitcoin transformed from a hobbyist's experiment into a global conversation. It bought pizzas. It fueled online black markets. It inspired entrepreneurs. It alarmed governments. It survived crashes and criticism. And it did all this without its creator, who had walked away and left the world with a tool no one could uninvent. The believers grew louder. The skeptics sharpened their attacks. The price wobbled like a roller coaster. Bitcoin was no longer a child. It was a teenager, awkward, rebellious, full of potential, and just beginning to test its place in the world.